Hello and welcome to my channel, I Want to Lose Gaming. Today, we will be taking a look at the power gap between a regular Constellation 0 Ayaka with a Blackcliff longsword versus a Constellation 6 Ayaka with a Refinement 5 Mistsplitters Reforged. I also want to pose the question to you of whether you think this gap is acceptable. Let's first familiarize ourselves with my Ayaka. Her stats are as follows. First with the Blackcliff longsword, and here are her stats with the Mistsplitters Reforged. More importantly, the Mistsplitter Reforged passive at Refinement 5 can provide Ayaka up to 80% bonus elemental damage, which is absolutely massive. We'll be seeing how each of her constellations affect her kit's damage output. Before looking at her constellations though, let's quickly compare the difference in damage between the weapons. With the Blackcliff longsword, Ayaka's burst ticks are doing 10,306 damage. With the Mistsplitters Reforged, she is doing 16,686 damage per tick. This is already a 62% increase in damage just from the weapon alone. Moving forward though, we'll be using the Mistsplitter at Constellation 0 as the baseline for her other constellations to compare to. Starting off with Constellation 1, every basic attack has a 50% chance to reduce the cooldown on her E by 0.3 seconds. Given Ayaka's attack frequency, if you're using her basic attacks, I personally averaged around 7 to 8 seconds per E. This is a 2 to 3 second reduction in comparison to her original 10-second cooldown. I consider this a very modest gain in effectiveness, and personally I'd give this constellation a 2 slime rating out of 5 slimes. Overall, a rather poor constellation. The next constellation, Constellation 2, is where things start to get interesting for Ayaka. Constellation 2 adds 2 smaller bursts to Ayaka's burst. Each of these smaller bursts do 20% of the original big burst's damage, and they fly off to the left and right by about 30 degrees. If both the small bursts connect, this leads to a whopping 40% gain in total burst damage. However, this constellation can be pretty situational and requires a large and mobile target to fully utilize. This constellation increases each burst tick's damage if both the small bursts connect to 23,360 damage, for a 40% gain in comparison to the previous constellation. I will have to give this constellation a 5 slime rating out of 5 slimes. Even though it is not always consistent and applicable in every scenario, this constellation provides sensory overload to blind both you and your enemies, and it is extremely satisfying to connect 60 ticks of burst damage on a large target. Constellation 3 is next, and this is a simple +3 levels to Ayaka's burst. If we're going from talent level 9 to talent level 12, this increases the sum of the main burst plus the 2 smaller bursts tick damage to 27,483 damage. This is a hefty 18% increase to Ayaka's burst damage in comparison to her Constellation 2 counterpart. Since this is further boosting Ayaka's burst damage, I have no choice but to give this constellation a 5 slime rating. And although a simple and straightforward constellation, sometimes bigger numbers is all we care about. The next constellation, Constellation 4, turns Ayaka into an interesting and powerful burst support with 30% defense shred. Against a level 93 enemy, this increases her burst's follow-up ticks after the first tick, since the first tick does not get the benefit of the defense down, to a whopping 32,377 damage per tick. Guys, remember there are 20 ticks to Ayaka's burst. If you can get all 3 of her burst thingies to connect, we're talking over 600,000 damage just by pressing the Q key. However, getting all 3 to hit is another story, and some targets, despite being deceptively large like the Primo Geovishap, are oddly difficult to do this to. Why oh why are we forced to auto-target the Primo Geovishap's paws? Can't we just aim it where we want to aim it? Alas, that will never happen in Genshin Impact. Anyway, I digress. This constellation increases Ayaka's burst damage by another 18% against a level 93 target. And this constellation deserves an easy 5 slime out of 5 slime rating. Next is Constellation 5, which boosts her E damage by 17.6% from levels 9 to 12. Yeah, definitely not worth the polls if you're going for just this constellation. I will give this one a 1 slime rating. Now really quick, before I show you guys the super interesting Constellation 6, might I ask you to smash that subscribe button. I do put in a ton of effort into these videos and it's the best way you can support my channel. And finally, her Constellation 6 is a very interesting constellation. It boosts her charge attack damage by 298%. This 298% goes into the bonus damage multiplier. We can see the effect it has on Ayaka's charge attack damage, bumping it up from 8,511 damage per slash to 18,673 damage per slash, a 119.4% increase to her charge attack damage. Now unfortunately, it has a 10-second cooldown, so if you're spamming her charge attacks, this will only apply to 1 charge attack every 10 seconds. But it does have a cool visual indicator on Ayaka's hand when it's ready. I personally believe that this constellation deserves a 4 slime out of 5 slime rating. Although it opens up a lot of new possibilities for Ayaka, you do have to get Constellation 5 as well. And considering you need to get 2 constellations for this one constellation essentially, that's why I'm only giving it a 4 slime out of 5 slime rating. Now let's rewind a bit back to Ayaka's Constellation 4. Looking at this, we can see through her constellations alone that they increase her burst damage by 94%. From 16,686 damage per tick at Constellation 0 to 1 to 32,377 damage per tick at Constellation 4. If you compare this to the free-to-play Blackcliff Longsword's damage at Constellation 0, which was 10,306 damage, we can see that this whale setup ends up doing over 3 times the amount of damage that the Blackcliff Longsword did with her burst. So what can we do with this crazy boost to her burst damage? Well, we can do this. Fortunately, even with the Blackcliff, a Constellation 0 Ayaka can still one-cycle the overworld Primo Geovishap and the other bosses with a full team. But compared to just solo Ayaka doing her burst against those bosses, this is an insane jump in her damage through her constellations. I've always believed that constellations should boost your character's damage by around 2-fold, and this is actually the case for Ayaka, surprisingly. However, once you factor in the Mistsplitter as well, Ayaka ends up doing over triple the damage of a Constellation 0 free-to-play setup with the Blackcliff Longsword. So what do you guys think about the power gap between the free-to-play setup with the Blackcliff Longsword and the whale setup with a Constellation 6 Refinement 5 Mistsplitter Ayaka? As for my personal opinion on Ayaka specifically, her Constellation 2 limits its own effectiveness against many smaller targets. Ayaka is already an amazing boss slayer even at Constellation 0, and with these constellations, her boss slaying potential is amplified even further. And if you may have noticed, now that my Ayaka is properly set up, the next video that's coming is going to be Ayaka vs Ganyu in a DPS showdown. I'm super excited to bring you guys that video, so be sure to stay tuned. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.